Welcome back to another edition of the Saturday to Sunday Football Podcast. I am Paul Perticchese, and thank you for joining me as always. Our guests continue to roll in here at Saturday to Sunday, and we are so excited to have back on the program this year. It is Mr. Matt Harmon of Reception Perception of Yahoo. Has his hands in so many different things, podcasts, rankings, videos, all this other stuff. Matt, glad to have you back here this year at Saturday to Sunday.
Hey, Paul, thanks for having me, man. Yeah, I'm looking forward to talking with you. I feel like it's been way too long. So yeah, man, it's interesting time of the year. Of course, we're starting to get some tidbits from training camp. We're starting to get some good hardcore confirmation bias. If you love the prospect and he's made a couple sick catches that you've seen on Twitter, that means you nailed it. You nailed the scouting report. But no, in all seriousness, it's definitely an interesting season we've got coming up here. So many young players, so many young receivers in interesting spots. So it's going to be a good conversation today for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've been talking about the rookies so much here with my previous guests that we're going to start tonight with last year's rookie class and focus on the wide receivers. We'll get to the new rookies this year and talk about them a little bit as well. But I think last year's wide receiver class really interesting because it didn't have the star power like heading into the draft, right? We had that long wait till like the early 20s and before we had a whole bunch of wide receivers, but we did have a lot of pretty solid production and intrigue over last year's wide receiver class. And I want to start with a guy that I didn't get your chance to pick your brain on last year in the summer. I've been seeing some tweets, so I know you like him, but I kind of want to hear your perspective on why you like Josh Downs and what you think he can bring moving forward. Obviously, interesting scenario there with a quarterback we know is going to run. Michael Pittman locked in as, their alpha outside wide receiver. They drafted A.D. Mitchell, but Josh Downs was the guy that I fought on my podcast last year saying he was my third favorite wide receiver. I had him ahead of Jordan Addison pre-draft. Obviously, post-draft, I moved him down based on for dynasty and stuff, but I thought he was right there with the Zay Flowers and the Jordan Addison on film eval alone. So what is it that it seems from gathering that you're a fan of Josh Downs? What is it about him that you like and maybe his trajectory moving forward?
Yeah, I had him in the same tier as all of those guys too, like Flowers and Addison. I was a big Josh Downs fan last year, and just easy separation obviously is the number one thing that you saw at the college level. He was fantastic against man and press coverage despite being a slot receiver. He was actually the best contested catch receiver that I charted that year, despite the fact that he's a smaller framed player. But Drake May had a lot of faith to like go up or allow Josh Downs to go up in tight coverage and win balls. And he was definitely adept at doing that with Josh Downs. And really the thing that I like so much about him now is that I think I've seen proof of concept of all of those things at the NFL level. Last year in reception perception, 77.5% success rate versus man coverage, 93rd percentile mark there for Josh Downs, 82nd against zone. So he's a two-way coverage beater here. I really just think he is just a guy that's going to consistently get open for you. You're right. He's probably not going to be the number one target on this team because Michael Pittman's a very good player. I've always been kind of higher than consensus on Michael Pittman as a player. But I love the way those two guys work off of each other because Pittman, despite the fact that he's a bigger receiver, they use him off the ball a lot. They use him at flanker. They can mismatch those two a little bit. Downs and Pittman, I think they'll be able to do a lot of creative things there. I'm high on Shane Steichen as an offensive play caller and offensive designer after what we saw last year. And then the fact that they have A.D. Mitchell here now, who, he might not start the season as a feature player because he's a rookie. I'm not too concerned about that. But in the long term, I think he is the perfect sort of vertical X receiver to complement these two guys. So overall, really love Indy's receiver room. I'm very high on this Colts wide receiver room. I think they're going to make Anthony Richardson's life easier. They're going to ease some of these accuracy concerns because especially Downs is a great separator. You already saw those guys kind of have a pretty solid connection in their respective rookie seasons. But yeah, guys like Josh Downs, maybe they're never going to be number one receivers, but I love them as long-term productive pros. And based on his rookie year RP profile, I think there's really no reason to not be bullish on him right now.
Yeah, I'm right there with you, and it's going to be interesting to kind of see Anthony Richardson hopefully a full season if he stays healthy, but kind of
Fingers
see
crossed,
that,
man.
yeah,
Fingers
see
crossed,
that
because it should be exciting.
Yeah, see that passing game kind of evolve because Richardson was a guy I really liked. I thought people, were overly concerned about the accuracy and stuff in college, but as we saw, like guys can improve upon that, especially if the situation is better. And we started out with Josh Allen. I think that's the hope in Indy for a guy like Anthony Richardson to come along like that. Let's pivot over to the Green Bay Packers because there's a little bit to unpack there. Obviously, last year they had Jayden Reed, Dontayvion Wicks. I feel like this offseason has been like a roller coaster of like draft Twitter and just talking about these, receivers who likes a lot of Dontayvion Wicks hype out there. Christian Watson's ADP is climbing now. Jayden Reed was the best last year in terms of production. What are your thoughts on the two from last year and how they fit with Christian Watson there? And maybe, if you were moving forward in a dynasty realm, like would there be a clear one or two of these receivers that you would say these were the ones that I'd kind of want to get my hands on, if I'm buying now and projecting maybe, improved production going forward?
Well, it's a really good room, which for the Packers is great news. For fantasy players and dynasty managers, I think it's going to be a tough situation to crack because, I think Romeo Doubs he's grown on me a little bit after his first season. His second season, I think I really get what they like about Dobbs. Paul, I'll probably reference this a couple times on the pod. It's like a concept I'm obsessed with right now is the sacrificial X receiver, which is just like this guy that's going to line up on the boundary and run clear out routes for everybody. And every now and again, when your quarterback likes to look and he trusts the player, he can go try to, fit in a tight coverage vertical pass to this sacrificial X receiver and make a big play. And it's pretty clear that that's what Jordan Love really likes about Romeo Doubs. So he's in this mix. Bo Melton last year, I don't have like a RP profile on Bo Melton, but the guy did lead the team in yards per route run last year, was a productive player in spurts. So it's a very, very deep room, which is complicated because to bring it back to those two second-year receivers, I love a lot of what I saw out of Jayden Reed and Dontayvion Wicks. I'll start with Jayden Reed because Reed was a prospect that I really liked. I liked him as a route runner. I liked his ability to beat press coverage and win on the outside, which is funny because that's not how he was used at all as a rookie, right? He was mostly used in from the slot, design touches, a lot of screen routes, a lot of routes underneath, but I think when you actually watch him on a route by route basis, and obviously as shown in his reception perception results, the guy is a legit, really good, just ISO ball route runner. 72.2% success rate versus man, 81.7 against zone. Really great press coverage score and very limited looks. So it's kind of hard to say whether that's sticky or not, but I think we do know that he is a guy that can run real legitimate routes. I'm definitely concerned that he could end up being sort of like a Curtis Samuel, Elijah Moore type, where when I watch them, I see guys that separate and win on their routes, but coaching staffs tend to like these guys in sort of very limited roles, design touches, short routes, things like that. I hope that is not the case with Jayden Reed, because again, I think he's more along that real receiver line than some of the guys that get pigeonholed in this particular archetype. So he is still, I think, my favorite of the group. I think the guy that should be going first in dynasty drafts and redraft leagues. But I do think this room could be tight because it's a deep room. And that brings us to Dontayvion Wicks, who was not a player that I charted during the collegiate process. He's not a guy that I had an RP profile in coming into the draft, but he started to make a few plays early on last season. So I did include him in the in-season rookie report last year. And obviously has a full profile up on the site now. I mean, the guy's, again, another really good separator here, pretty much in the same ballpark in terms of success rate versus man and zone as Jayden Reed. And I think you actually saw him go up against a lot more press coverage because he kind of lined up everywhere. In the games I charted for him, 64.6% snaps outside in the slot on 30.2%. He's in the backfield on 5.2% because while Jayden Reed is their primary pre-snap motion man, they're not afraid to do that with Dontayvion Wicks as well. But I think you see a lot of traits with him that just from a route running perspective, you might want to line this guy up on the outside and have him run real big boy routes down the field. His out route success rate's really high, corner routes, post routes, but sort of those base NFL routes too, like shorter to the line of scrimmage, slants, curls. All of those he checks a lot of boxes for me, man. So it is definitely a crowded room, but I really like the way these players project. It's just like, I think figuring out the roles and the target distribution is going to be very difficult for this room.
Yeah, it's going to be one of those things where like they all are going at different places of drafts. And it's like if one of these guys was to emerge to be like the clear producer in terms of highest fantasy value, you're probably going to get him at a value because if we knew who that person was going to be, they'd be going higher than where they're going, whether it's Reed, whether it's Watson. Obviously, if it was Dobbs or Wicks, I don't think we expect Dobbs to potentially ever be the lead guy, like you said, based on what he's doing. But like if one of these guys was to emerge, he'd be a real fantasy steal in all settings, I think, as we're taking a look at this. A couple other guys I want to pick your brain from last year's class. Tank Dell obviously was having a fantastic season prior to the injury. I know you're a big Nico Collins guy as well. Now Stephon Diggs is added into the mix. Like, is it just Houston's going to go nuts on offense? Is one of these guys going to kind of suffer with all three of them being there? How do you kind of look at this Houston scenario and look at Tank Dell entering his second season now, but now with another big mouth there at Stephon Diggs as part of the puzzle as well?
Yeah, they certainly have all of the pieces required to go nuts on offense, at least in the passing game. I'm interested to see if their run game comes together after, I don't even know if you can really call it like an up and down year running the ball in Houston. It was mostly just a down year running the ball. Maybe more offensive line health, second year in the system, getting a back in Joe Mixon who probably fits the system a little bit better than what we saw last year, certainly with Dameon Pierce, and then obviously they move into Devin Singletary. I think that's going to help the overall balance of the offense and the overall approach of the offense. So I think that's important just to sort of table set there, because I think pushing that unit forward can help the pass game. If they're just in more positive down and distance situations, that's going to matter a lot for CJ Stroud, who, of course, I don't know about you, Paul, but how can you not be high on CJ Stroud after what he showed as a rookie? So he should be the type of quarterback that can be a rising tide lifts all boats sort of player, because this receiver room rocks. I think it's the best receiver room in the NFL right now. Obviously, yeah, huge fan of Nico Collins, what he showed in his first 2 years, but he went absolutely berserk in his third season in reception perception. I mean, he pushed himself up there in the range of like a top 10 NFL receiver. Tank Dell, though, I mean, not too far behind, man. And the way he won last year, I'm curious, like, your thoughts on Tank Dell as a prospect, because I should have just been higher on him. I should have just ranked him higher, because I got caught up on the size. And look, ultimately, maybe size ends up being an issue for Tank Dell long term. Like, he did get hurt on, I know people are pissed off about he was lead block. This is a pretty just typical play, and like he got like run up on. That's going to happen. So maybe that's a size thing. Maybe it's right to be kind of lower on him from a size perspective, but from a player perspective, his rookie year profile looks an awful lot like his collegiate profile, and he was able to win at a really high level in just doing it that way. And the thing that's really interesting with Dell that I think makes him, a guy that could continue, if he continues to improve, maybe launch himself ahead of a guy like Stephon Diggs in this receiver room, who I do think has taken a small step back as a player. It's the fact that despite the fact that he is a tiny wide receiver, Tank Dell only lined up inside on 19% of his snaps sampled for reception perception, outside on 75.8%, and sort of split his time between on and off the line of scrimmage. Flanker, played a little bit of X too. And as an outside receiver, he won on corner routes, out routes, and comeback routes, all at an above 80% success rate. And against like man coverage too. Big boy routes despite that small receiver frame. So when you see a guy do that as a rookie, I mean, he was one of the best outbreaking route receivers last year, just league wide, not just among rookies, like league wide. So that gets you pretty excited about a guy going into a second season, obviously with a quarterback who has the confidence to rip those throws as well.
Yeah, and I think a guy like Tank Dell, who I did like, before the draft happened, is I think everybody kind of anticipated, just because of his size, that even though he won outside in college, that he was probably going to play inside in the NFL. And he quickly put that to bed. You heard reports, he had a great rapport with CJ Stroud. And then I think once he did it and he showed his ability to win it consistently and not be pushed inside. Obviously, Houston saw that as well. They weren't force feeding him inside. Like you said, the percentage was very low. I think that speaks volumes. And I think it also kind of opens the door. Like, I know even for myself, as someone who watches what I can in terms of the college guys, like, that we have to be very careful about pigeonholing guys. And it goes the other way too. How many times do we pigeonhole big guys to expect them to be outside guys? And we'll probably talk about one in a little bit who's probably better suited to be an inside guy just based on his skill set. But like, that's the thing, that sometimes we fall into those stereotypes and those size dimensions in terms of where guys fit. But it's an evolving game, and it's changed so much over the last 5-10 years that I think that's the thing with Dell. And it's gonna be interesting to kind of see how the Stefon Diggs dynamic. I kind of expect Diggs to be in the slot more than any of those three, and I think that's probably how it plays out, because of how successful Dell was on the outside last year. But it'll be fun to kind of watch that and see, can CJ Stroud support all three of these guys to reach their values of where they're going in fantasy. It's going to be fun to see this year. A guy who didn't get a ton of opportunities last year, Jaxon Smith Njigba. Like, when you evaluate him now going into the next year, do you still use some of your college evaluation when you watched him and what he did at Ohio State? Or now, after, even though it wasn't nearly as much of a sample as the rest of the guys who got immediate playing time and significant reps, do you just focus on the Seattle? How is that dynamic? Because we don't usually see round one guys come into the league and play. We usually see him play a lot more than what Jaxon Smith Njigba did, especially with his profile.
Yeah, JSN's funny because he was in that class, my number one receiver. I thought he was just kind of in his own tier too, because he had such a clean profile. And then it's funny though, like we all agree, really good prospect, right? And typically it's just talent, cream rises to the top. Talent creates opportunity. We typically talk about things in a fantasy sense when it comes to these young players like that. And generally that is true. Right? Like I talked about A.D. Mitchell earlier. He's been splitting snaps with Alec Pierce as that third outside receiver for the Colts. Based on what Pierce has been in the NFL so far, and based on who I think A.D. Mitchell can be, I think in that situation, the cream will rise to the top, right? Like the talent of A.D. Mitchell will eventually win out, even if he is not starting, week one or something like that. Think about like when Justin Jefferson was running behind B.C. Johnson the first couple of weeks of his rookie season. We all agree that like a guy like Justin Jefferson is talented as he is. Okay, he's not playing a lot to start the year. Who cares? Eventually he'll get out there. The difference between those situations and what Jaxon Smith Njigba faced in Seattle last year is DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett are really, really, really good receivers. At times these guys have been top 10 receivers, or at least like kind of nipping on the heels of the top 10 receivers in the league. And even if I think DK is maybe leveled off as maybe not like an elite receiver in the league, or maybe not even a superstar receiver in the league, but just like a very good number one. And Lockett, I think, has declined a little bit, I think taking a step back from 22 to 23. And, obviously with aging receivers, you never know how it's going to go. Those guys are still established star level players, especially for that franchise, for that coaching staff and everything like that. As soon as he was drafted by the Seahawks, man, I was like, you can kind of forget it with Jaxon Smith Njigba's rookie year, because it's just like, he can be, I think he's a good prospect, but I don't think he is an elite level prospect himself. He's not going to come in there and just, thump these guys to the side, especially because he gets injured early on in preseason. Any missed time for wide receivers in the offseason, these young rookies like that just sucks, especially when you're trying to combat against two veteran receivers. So I was kind of willing to just almost like, I don't really totally, not to say I'm completely dismissing his rookie season from a production standpoint, but there are plenty of, I would say, reasons, not excuses, for why people are kind of viewing his production as a little bit disappointing coming off of year one. But I think when you actually watch him play, when you just look at him on a route by route basis, his reception perception profile is pretty good coming out of his rookie season. 72% success rate versus man. He wins on routes like post routes, dig routes, out routes. That's what made him really exciting to me as a prospect is, yeah, he can be a layup slot receiver, but I also think he can win in that intermediate area. And I think you saw him translate that to the NFL level, even if it wasn't always from a production standpoint. So I'm actually quite high on JSN coming into this year, because I think he can pass up Lockett this year just with the way their career trajectories are going. And like when I watch Jalen Polk as a prospect at Washington and Ryan Grubb's offense, I can see so much of like JSN functioning in that type of secondary receiver role here. So, and not only, again, am I just generally high on him, I think there's actually a chance he could lead this team in catches, which maybe is like a bold prediction, but I'm very high on him going into his second season.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting with the new staff there, how Their offense looks different. I think we expected to look different. The coordinator coming from Washington in terms of college, which used a ton of Bree wide. It's going to be interesting to kind of see, he's been the guy I've been trying to grab this offseason if I can in places, because I think you're buying at the lowest point you might be able to get him for,
Totally.
and then his value in the stock. We started this conversation a while ago with Josh Downs, and you mentioned that he was in the same tier for you with Jordan Addison, with Zay Flowers. When you look at Flowers and Addison, has your opinions changed on what you think they could be at the NFL after their rookie year? Do you have one clearly ahead of the other in terms of long-term dynasty? Is it the one not attached, to Justin Jefferson? So he's always going to kind of be that second guy, or, let's talk through those two a little bit.
Yeah, I'm actually much higher on Flowers right now because I think I can see more upside there with him, not just from a dynasty perspective, but from a player perspective. Weirdly, Addison was like exactly who I thought he'd be in the NFL in year one. And I think that's just like a very good number 2 receiver long term. I don't think and he'll always be the number 2 receiver to Justin Jefferson, period. End of story, doesn't matter what. But I think just even from a player perspective, like I don't view him as one of these guys like a Devontae Smith or Jalen Waddle, for example, where they're number 2 receivers nominally across from a great like elite level alpha receiver in Tyreek Hill and AJ Brown. But I think there's a chance that if one of those guys was to miss time or, just in another alternate universe, I think those guys could be number 1 receivers. I don't, and obviously that's a projection just because we haven't seen it from a long stretch of time or whatever. But I generally feel that way with those players. I don't really feel that way with Jordan Addison. I think his rookie year kind of just confirmed that to me. So from a fantasy perspective, right, he's going to be in a great situation. There's no doubt about that. But when we're talking about a player like that in an offense where the quarterback is either going to be Sam Darnold, where I think he is going to have, as he should, tunnel vision for number 18 and be aggressive and pushing the ball to one guy, or it's a young developing offense with a rookie quarterback, I'm not necessarily that excited about Addison from a redraft perspective this year. And that does obviously trickle into his dynasty value as well. With Zay Flowers, man, the big question for me is just how high is the ceiling? Because I think the floor is very high for him as a player. Really liked a lot of what I saw from him as a separator. I think he can do a lot more than just the design touches stuff that they were giving him early in the year. Like it's not too dissimilar to what I said about Tank Dell, where you see him win some real big boy routes, Zay Flowers, on outbreaking patterns against tight man coverage. But I just need to see him get better against press. I need to see him get better at the catch point, and just kind of work that chemistry with Lamar Jackson a little bit better. But overall, very high on Flowers. If given the choice between the two, I was slightly higher on Flowers than Addison coming into the league. But coming out of their rookie seasons, I'm actually significantly higher on Flowers than I am Addison.
Another guy who went in round 1 last year, and this was the one that I suffered the most pushback because I just wasn't a fan of him, was Quentin Johnston. We all know how year 1 turned out. For people who were fans of him, I don't know where you stood on that. Going into year 2, is there hope that he can make it? I mean, the reports from training camp haven't been glowing in terms of him not being able to sound. So far, it sounds like beat out DJ Chark to be the 3rd wide receiver. So he's the guy I was kind of alluding to before. Like, you look at him and you think he should be an outside X receiver, but I'm just not sure that's how he wins. Would he be better in an inside slot role, or does he not have the game for that either?
Yeah, so it's tough with Quentin Johnston because I think he was a really difficult player to rank because, like you mentioned, every role and every team was just not going to be a fit for him. That's just like the reality of who he is as a player. I wrote in his reception perception profile coming off of his rookie season that this is a player that was clearly set up to fail by the coaching staff that drafted him, but also didn't do anything individually, like in isolation, to deserve role catering, which is, I think, why he's in a difficult spot in this second season. Because number one, Paul, there's just, I feel the exact same way as I think you probably felt about Quentin Johnston, is that there was nothing, and I mean nothing, on his prospect film, whether you liked him or not. There was just very little evidence that this was going to be a guy that you could ask from day one, ask to line up as an X receiver and win routes from a nuanced perspective, run routes and win against press man coverage and track the ball over his shoulder as a deep threat. But that is exactly what the Los Angeles Chargers asked him to do last year. I realized that Mike Williams got hurt and that maybe, probably foiled their long-term developmental play, because it was clear that Quentin Johnston was going to be the fourth receiver to start last year behind Josh Palmer, despite the fact that he was round 1 pick. But I mean, Chargers, Mike Williams gets hurt all the time. Keenan Allen, he gets hurt a lot. Like, you were a win now team and you took a developmental receiver in round 1. That there's a good chance that guy's going to end up having to play. And he did. And he was pretty much exclusively an X receiver, which, like I said, just makes no sense for the player he was at TCU. But when you strip away all the surrounding variables, which is what reception perception tries to do, he was about as bad as it gets in terms of in isolated perspectives. He was the first percentile success rate versus man coverage. He was the first percentile success rate versus zone coverage. He was a second percentile player against press. The only players in the reception perception database who had a lower success rate versus man coverage than Quentin Johnston did as a rookie was Marquise Lee as a rookie, Devontae Parker as a rookie, Jalen Reagor as a rookie, Terrace Marshall as a rookie, and Justin Hunter as a second-year player. So those are the odds that he's trying to beat out, right? And Parker's tough because he grew into being a still below average separator, but I think a decent X receiver at times. But he was a great contested catch receiver, and Quentin Johnston that's never going to be his game. So I can see if you're looking at the Chargers receiver room right now, I'm very high on Ladd McConkey. I think he's going to catch a lot of passes for him this year. Josh Palmer's a fine number 3 receiver that you can get by as your 2. And yeah, if you just want an X receiver out there, DJ Chark's not a great player, but he's probably a better fit in that role than Quentin Johnston. So that might honestly end up being the best thing for him, is that they can use him in certain packages and get him off the line of scrimmage so that he doesn't just have to run deep routes from the X receiver position. Because based on who he was in college and based on who he was as a rookie, I just don't think that's the best role for him.
Yeah, Quentin Johnston last year was very similar to further beyond that. I struggled with N'Keal Harry when he was coming out because I just didn't see the role of how it was going to translate. Same thing with Quentin Johnston. And again, I think we sometimes then get into these stereotypes where then we can't see a guy who can separate but be a bigger guy. So we got to be very careful sometimes in that regard. But yeah, he was a guy that they could have pivoted to other ways to get a more immediate player. And when they took him, right off the bat, I was like, how? I don't see the perfect fit here. And that obviously came to fruition last year. And hopefully for him, he could find a role and have success. Because even if, I always say here, even Saturday Sunday, even if I'm not a huge fan of a guy, I hope they shove it down my throat and, totally, they have a great, successful career. I want all these guys to be great. The more great players, the better it is for the league. So hopefully we could see something from him. Second-year wide receiver, and we'll kind of also transition to tie it to a rookie. Thoughts, take out the off-the-field stuff for a second. Rashee Rice, what you saw on film of him, when you put him through reception perception, what you think his ceiling could be, and then tie it into maybe Xavier Worthy. If you could only have one of them in Dynasty, obviously we've never seen Worthy play it down in the NFL yet. There's some size concerns there compared to what we now know of Rashee Rice, the football player on the field.
Yeah, talk about a player who shoved it in my face last year. I was not high on Rashee Rice after charting his college film at SMU in his final season. So now there are a couple caveats there. The biggest one being that, after charting out the profile and putting it out, I did have a couple people reach out to me and be like, yeah, he's probably playing with a toe injury during most of this sample, which is totally fine. Maybe that data is just all injury tainted, but it was a pretty poor prospect profile. But the biggest thing I think was the difference between, and why I think Rashee Rice thrived as a rookie, even though I wasn't high on what he showed at SMU. So in his prospect profile, Rashee Rice took 83.6% of his sampled snaps out wide right. He was on the line of scrimmage on 70.6%. And he ran a curl route or a 9 route on 56.1% of his charted routes. So we are talking pure boundary receiver on one side of the field, and you're just running goes and curls. So when the Chiefs drafted him, I was like, maybe they view him as a developmental outside X receiver that can replace MVS or could maybe battle out MVS and take that role. That could not be more different than how the Chiefs used Rashee Rice in his rookie season. So he took 47.6% of his sampled snaps as a rookie in the slot or the backfield, and he was only on the line for 56.1 or 56.6% of his snaps. they used him in bunch formations. They used him in the slot. He ran a slant route on 38.3% of his sampled snaps. That is the highest of any player I've charted since 2014. So very much like short routes to the line of scrimmage in the slot, a kind of it's definitely like a Mickey Mouse designery type of role, but it was able to get him free from press. It was able to get him sort of easier coverage looks against zone and get him running in the open field. All the things he's really good at. Like, he's pretty good against zone coverage, or at least he was last year. He was, much better when you got him away from man coverage. He was good in the open field. There's no question about that. I see Rashee Rice sort of as kind of like a Juju Smith-Schuster or Jarvis Landry type. I think those are his closest comparables when you look at his rookie season in RP versus those guys. Those are kind of pretty similar players, which, I mean, prime Juju, I was always lower than consensus on Juju, and kind of I was a little mixed on Landry. But the prime version of those players with Patrick Mahomes is like absolutely a guy you want for Dynasty, especially now that they have two players, obviously Marquise Brown for 1 year, theoretically, and Xavier Worthy for the next few seasons as a first-round pick. Those guys are going to be clearing space, man. Like, however teams were defending Kansas City last year, they can't do that now that they have two dudes that can legit run, and especially one guy in Marquise Brown that can win routes in the intermediate area. It can be a real deal NFL route runner, which they absolutely did not have last year. So you said off-field stuff. Who knows what happens with the suspension or anything. Initially coming into the year, like, especially after they added those two guys, I kind of thought maybe I'd be lower than consensus on Rashee Rice. I've actually found myself to be like, kind of, he's the receiver that I think I want to draft from this room. He's definitely not a perfect wideout. I don't think any of those three guys that we just mentioned, Brown, Worthy, or Rice himself, I don't think any of them are perfect wideouts. I don't think any of them are true number ones. They all had to be kind of used in the right role. I've seen proof of concept with Rashee Rice in this role after one season, and I think he's going to have his life made a lot easier because of these speed players added this year.
Yeah, it's gonna be fun because, I mean, Kansas City's won 2 Super Bowls in a row, and they didn't have that dynamic, deep threat playmaking ability, and now they've added two guys, in Hollywood and Xavier Worthy, who could kind of change the dynamic, and that will open up, like you said, underneath. Will open up Kelsey Moore. Will open up the stuff to Rashee Rice. So I think they're just going to even be harder to defend now for teams trying to knock them off the top there. I know pre-draft, just from listening to you in a lot of places, you slightly had Odunze ahead of Malik Nabers just on your film eval and reception perception. First question, and I'll tie it into just Rome versus Nabers, was Marvin his own tier? You talked about last year JSN was his own tier, and then you had the guys after him. Was it Marv this year by himself at high, obviously, and then the next two really higher than usual, but in their own tier, or was it a tier of beret for you?
Yeah, tier 3 to me. I had them all as tier 1 prospects over like on my stacked draft board, which is multiple draft classes together. So to me, it was one of those like, hey, you like Malik Nabers better than Marvin Harrison and Rome Odunze? That's fine with me. I don't care. Like, I'm not gonna argue two tier 1 players against each other too much. So yeah, tier 1 with all three of those guys. There were some differences like in nitpicks and stuff like that, but yeah, all of them were fantastic prospects. So yeah, for me, not and Harrison, yeah, was my 1, Rome was my 2, and Malik Nabers was my 3. But yeah, they were all tier 1 prospects.
Now, once we got landing spots for those 3 guys, have you kept it in your like, if you were ranking for Dynasty or still at a late rookie draft or whatever, would it be the order in which you thought of them, or the Nabers immediately, with the uncertainty at the quarterback position long term, obviously outstanding for the Giants, the immediate target hog, or would Caleb being attached to Rome and that you liked him slightly more before, would you pick Rome ahead of Nabers, or would you have flip-flopped them based on landing spots, immediate opportunity?
Yeah, it's because both landing spots have their flaws. I just kept it in the same order. And like in my overall dynasty rankings, I think I have Rome Odunze at wide receiver 17. I have Malik Nabers at wide receiver 19. I'm a little more conservative on rookies than some other rankers. Just like, I kind of want to see it first. a little bit, at least like a few weeks into the NFL before I really bump them up over established players. But that is often a criticism I get, is that I'm too conservative with rookies, but that's fine. I'll be okay with that. So yeah, pretty much right there, neck and neck again, and they're in the same tier in my overall dynasty rankings. So again, if you are a drafter and using my rankings and you take Malik Nabers over Odunze, I'm not gonna come find you and beat you up or anything, man. So with these two guys in particular, like you said, the landing spots are interesting because for Malik Nabers, it's just, he should moonwalk into 140 targets this year. It's just how efficient is that volume going to be? Ironically, I have Jalen Waddle ranked one spot ahead of Malik Nabers in my dynasty rankings, and I actually think that Jalen Waddle's rookie season is a pretty good template for how things might play out for Malik Nabers this year. You remember this, watching Jalen Waddle as a prospect, it was like, dude, this guy can fly. He wins at all three levels. He beats man coverage. He is as fast as it gets, and he is a true deep threat. And then you come out of his rookie season, and people that didn't watch him in college, like, can this guy make big plays? Because he had like over 100 catches, but under 10 yards per reception. Because I think, and Tua ended up becoming a really good quarterback, but it was kind of a broken situation and all that. So they fed him a lot of design touches underneath. I feel like Nabers could come out of this year, and we're looking at that type of season, which is, from a fantasy perspective, whatever, because he catches 100 balls, it's going to end up being productive. But I do wonder if that, like, we don't see the true full field, like, tipping nature of Malik Nabers' game. Maybe we don't see that actualized in year one because of the quarterback play and sort of some of the offensive limitations. With Odunze, it's different because he's just in a crowded room, man. Like, I think DJ Moore played well enough last year to graduate from like a high tier 3 receiver to a mid tier 2 receiver. He's a superstar wideout. Keenan Allen is still a target hog, but I think he is a player that's taken a step back a little bit. The only difference between this situation, which I know and the Jaxon Smith Njigba one, which I talked about earlier, and like, hey, you as a rookie just don't come in here and like beat out two really good players. I mean, Odunze is a much better prospect than Jaxon Smith Njigba, despite the fact that I liked JSN. So I think there's a chance Odunze surprises and maybe outproduces a guy like Keenan Allen this year. But overall, yeah, he's going to struggle to get – he's not going to come close to the target volume that Nabers is going to get in what should be probably a better offense, but still an offense with a rookie quarterback.
Yeah, for sure. It's good. We don't any year, most years, those guys are going to be number one first wide receiver taken. Just happened to be 3 of them all in the same draft class this year. A couple other quick hitters here to end the show. 3 guys taken round 1, early round 2 that I think most people probably look at and say there's some refinement, development needed. Brian Thomas Jr., who ran a lot of I'm interested to hear your take. It seemed like he ran not a very expanded route tree at LSU. Maybe reception perception showed something different. Keon Coleman and Xavier Leggette. When you put them through reception perception, was there some concerns on these guys, or were there some limitations on these guys in terms of maybe, that normally we wouldn't see them go as high as they did, but they did?
So I'll go in reverse order there.
Okay.
I'll go with Keon Coleman first, where, Coleman, I like him as a player, but he sort of fits in that bucket of guys we were talking about earlier, of these big receivers that are probably best out of the slot. A guy in Keon Coleman that his success rate versus man and press coverage numbers are low, right? They're below the 35th percentile, but his success rate versus zone coverage is pretty solid at 80.2%. And for those guys, like, if you just look back in the history of reception perception, I did a whole breakdown on this on YouTube that people can check out if they want like all the specific examples, but players who have been below the 35th percentile against man and press coverage in reception perception as prospects and gone on to find career success in the NFL, they've all universally moved to the slot, like extended career success. There have been some guys like, Christian Watson or Will Fuller, like DJ Chark. Do you consider those guys successes? But they've had moments in the NFL. Those are like the volatile deep threats. It's pretty much those are your 2 buckets. When I look at Keon Coleman, I know what I think he is. Like, I think he could be a big slot receiver. It's been interesting to hear out of Buffalo so far that one of the ways that he's impressed people is his ability to like read and diagnose coverages and know where to sit down against zone. I think that's the strength of his game. I know he's a big receiver and they kind of have other guys who could play out of the slot, but I think they're going to do some things to get him in some condensed formations and make it, maybe he's not like an actual slot alignment, but they're going to do things to cater his alignment. I think that will help him a lot. With Xavier Leggette, he's probably even more of an example of what I just said, as a guy that I'm curious your film evaluation on Xavier Leggette, because like obviously we know the the career like resume doesn't look like a typical round 1 pick. But the film is like wild. Like it's an enthralling watch with Xavier Leggette, but it's not a refined product. I don't think you can get around that. But I do like the fact that Dave Canales, as soon as they drafted him, talked about getting him in motion, talked about, him running crossing routes, because he's another one that not a refined press man beater, but I think he was better against zone coverage than people give him credit for. He can absolutely dunk on you in contested situations and really routes over the middle of the field. Dig route success rate and slant route success rate were pretty high. Nobody's Deebo Samuel, but if you're talking about like a guy who could be used in the wide receiver ways of Deebo Samuel, I do think Xavier Leggette fits into that bucket, just not the like design touches and running back stuff. That's not really it. With Brian Thomas, he's the one I definitely liked the most out of this trio, like pretty significantly. And you're right, he definitely ran a limited route tree. There's no question about that. A whopping 67.1% of Brian Thomas's charted routes were slant, curl, or 9. It's not the most limited. I've definitely charted more limited route trees in my time doing prospects, but it's definitely up there. It's actually pretty similar to DK Metcalf's early career utilization plan with the Seattle Seahawks. 67.4% of his routes as a rookie, DK Metcalf, were a slant, a curl, or a 9 route. I think that's probably the path that Brian Thomas is going to have to be on. He's going to have to ease in a little bit. But when you watch him in isolation, I think he dealt with press really well. I think his route running got better throughout the course of the season. So he was the one I was highest on. Maybe he's never even a true number 1 receiver, but I think if you're asking like somebody to win on the outside as an X receiver, I think he probably is the best prospect there.
Yeah, he definitely was the highest on my rank of those guys. But like we said, we know what his game was. And if that game translates as well as it did in college, then he'll be a good player, similar to like what you brought up with DK Metcalf. Last question for you. Of the wide receivers we haven't talked about, because some we talked about even with the second-year guys, is there one that not just the highest on your rank, but one that you maybe like more than what the consensus seems to be out there? We're talking guys like Ricky Pearsall, Jermaine Burton, Roman Wilson, Malachi Corley, Troy Franklin, Javon Baker, Jalen McMillan, Luke McCaffrey. Is there one of those guys that you were surprised by either reception perception, or you're just like, I kind of like their game more than I expected, and you just a little bit higher than maybe where most people might be?
Yeah, the two guys that surprised me the most, like I knew nothing about them really before I charted them, other than just like what I had seen a few people said. Ricky Pearsall and Jalen Polk. Yeah, Jermaine Burton's like his own conversation because obviously we know why he fell in the draft. But Ricky Pearsall was number 2 in success rate versus man among the prospects I charted last year. Obviously, he's going to struggle for immediate opportunity behind all the superstars that San Francisco has, but I do see what they want out of a player like that. The biggest complaint for the 49ers coming out of the Super Bowl was, hey, our receivers, other than Brandon Ayuk, our receivers don't beat man coverage, and that's why the big part of the reason why they lost the Super Bowl. Ricky Pearsall beats man coverage. He can win on those ISO routes from the outside, from the inside. I'm excited about him, obviously probably in year 2 and beyond, but he was somebody that I was much higher on. And Jalen Polk, Jalen Polk is a dog. I retweeted some quote from Gerard Mayo today about how much they love that he loves to do the dirty work and kind of like the thankless part of the wide receiver positions. That is 100% Jalen Polk, man. Second best zone beater in the class. Behind only his teammate Rome Odunze. He was right up there with like Ladd McConkey and Marvin Harrison in success rate versus zone coverage. Now he's not like a great press man beater, but he's solid in that regard. Like I said with JSN, kind of comparing that role, he's pretty good in those intermediate routes. Not like the quickest twitch, fastest player, but he has a little bit of build up speed. I'm not saying, Paul, that he's going to be the next Puka Nacua, obviously. By the way, I love that Puka's so good. Like when we do second-year receiver shows, we don't even talk about him.
Yeah, I was like, I don't even have any questions about him. Like, unless I start asking him like where he ranks in overall dynasty ranks, like there's nothing left to question about him.
Yeah, what do you have to say? It's like, I don't know. I actually, because I talk about him so infrequently, it's like I almost want to talk about him all the time. But like, I'm not saying Jalen Polk's about to be the next Puka Nacua, but I think from a role perspective, like again, get him involved in the blocking game, like have him run tough routes over the middle. I think he could be used in some similar ways like that. So if he has, obviously the Patriots don't have Matthew Stafford. They're hoping Drake May could be like something close to Matthew Stafford. But for the time being, he's a rookie. They have Jacoby Brissett. They don't necessarily have a quarterback position to have like a breakout rookie. But I do think from a skill set standpoint, he could be an immediate contributor, Jalen Polk in New England.
Yeah, and I think the thing about him is because a lot of people thought that was a little early for him. I think I think his ceiling could be higher, but I think the Patriots looked at a guy like Jalen Polk and were like, we're going to pick a rock solid double. He might not be that true guy that, like you said, can beat press, but you know what? Like, just like Carolina has invested in receivers this offseason to try to make life easier for Bryce Young, that's probably what New England's going to be doing next year. Whether it's a free agent like T. Higgins, whether it's a top 10 pick next year in the draft, that's that true guy. I don't think they wanted to swing and miss. I think they wanted to get a guy that could have a good rapport with his quarterback, and that's why they were drawn more to a guy like Polk than the upside or maybe the sizzle of A.D. Mitchell or somebody like that. And I think they looked at Polk and were like, he's a rock solid double. He could be a great number 2 wide receiver. We'll worry about number 1 down the line rather than trying to swing and find the low probability of maybe finding that true number 1 guy at the top of the second here. We'll wait and either get one in free agency, get one in a trade, or the top of the draft next year where the Patriots probably be picking again. And it seems like the drumbeat for Jalen Polk, even in training camps, has been pretty consistent. We'll see if the lack of offensive production hinders him this year, but I don't see a scenario where he's probably not their best wide receiver this 100%. Year.
I love that Panthers comp actually, because if you just spin it back a year ago, the Panthers needed wide receiver help, probably just as much as the Patriots need wide receiver help this year, right? Like they need screw upside. We need dudes who can play. But the Panthers last year, when they had a rookie quarterback, took Jonathan Mingo, who like Jonathan Mingo was. He was okay, but he was a developmental receiver. There's no doubt about it. And I thought he could really only thrive in one role, which was like he needed to be a big slot receiver. He's another receiver, big guy, but he can't play outside because he's not, especially early, because he's not a refined press man coverage beater. Well, the Panthers had Adam Thielen, old man Adam Thielen, who also has to play in the slot. So what do they do with Mingo? They took him early in the draft. They got to play him. They've had to throw him out. They threw him outside as an outside receiver, and it was never going to work. So I think Polk, who I graded higher than Mingo anyways, actually kind of graded him in that area where he went in the draft. So to me, it wasn't a reach. It like juxtaposing those two things side by side, I think, and how you're helping your young quarterback actually is a pretty instructive sort of example there. And by the way, they took an upside gamble later on in Javon Baker. So I think that they have an upside guy there. And for the first time ever, Paul, probably since we've been talking about football on the internet, I really liked what the New England Patriots did at wide receiver in the draft.
Yeah, we haven't said that for a while. So in a weird way, maybe Belichick moving on the Patriots receiver area finally will start to show some development and progression there. Matt, always a pleasure having you pop on the show. I know you got a lot going on. Share whatever new stuff's going on. I know you're busy with podcasts. You're busy with the Yahoo stuff, reception, perception. Share whatever you want to push here. And my audience, I'm sure, will eat it all up.
Hey, yeah, brother, I appreciate you, man. It's been a good time to get back on the pod and catch up. A lot of stuff going on, like you mentioned. Yeah, Yahoo, I have the fantasy football show is still going strong. And then we started a new football podcast, not a fantasy show. So it's been nice to get myself out of that area for a while, as much as I love fantasy football. Football 301 with Nate Tyson, Charles McDonald. That's been super fun to get started. So we have a few episodes up. People can subscribe to that. And receptionperception.com. Again, still firing off a lot of profiles heading into the season. We'll be dropping rankings, tiers, and everything like that over there. And again, yeah, all these guys we talked about today, they have profiles up on the site, so people can go check that out.
Guys, make sure you're checking out all of Matt's great work, checking out all of resources. I'm looking forward to diving into that new podcast, especially once my school year starts and I start up with my long commutes. It'll be queued up for sure. So on behalf of Matt, on behalf of our sound tech engineer, David Nakano, and myself, thank you for joining us, and look forward next time taking you from Saturday to Sunday.